Welcome to Season 8 of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us. We're in Season 8 and we still have a lot to talk about. Radio Free 501c is supported by USAE News, the weekly community newspaper of Association CVBs and hotels. Learn more at usaenews.com. She's back for part 2 of our conversation. It's Pamela Murphy, founder and CEO of Minerva Insight Strategies. We're here to talk about Build the Future Ready Association and the benefits of being proactive. It's Monday, July 27th, 2026. Thanks for joining us for episode 336. Hey everybody, hard to believe it's the last week of July already, but hope you're having a good time here on planet Earth, wherever you may be. Welcome to this edition of Radio Free 501c. I'm your host, Cecilia Sepp. Last time Pamela was on, I forgot to introduce myself, so I'm remembering to do it this time. My company, Rogue Tulips Consulting, brings you this podcast full of great ideas and different voices. So if you haven't followed us or subscribed yet on your favorite service, please take a moment and do that. It'll help us out and you won't miss any of these great conversations. We also want to thank USAE News for being our podcast partner here in 2026. Check them out at their website, usaenews.com. And as I mentioned, Pamela's back, and we had such a great conversation last month about the cost of being reactive. We said, hey, we need a part 2 about why you should be proactive. And so our topic this week is Build the Future Ready Association. And we're going to dive into the flip side of that conversation. But before we do that, Pamela, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. Would you like to say hello and tell us a little about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me back for this really important conversation. Sure, I'm Pamela Murphy. I am the founder and CEO of Minerva Insight Strategies. We are a global government relations, and business strategy firm. Throughout my career, I've worked across, all sectors: government, nonprofit, corporate. And I found that the organizations that are most successful don't just react to change, but they build the capacity and influence to anticipate it. And so that's why we started Minerva. We really help organizations integrate government relations and strategy into their organizational design so they can lead proactively.
That's great. And I think that is really an important thing, especially in the 21st century. Every era is different. Every century is different. We have different challenges and changes, but the 21st century is probably the most interesting, most challenging, most fun, and most opportunistic. And I don't mean in a bad way, but offering opportunities for us because we're living in a world full of quick technology, access to information, the ability to move around the globe fairly easily. So it's really kind of an exciting time. Excitement can cause stress, though, and I think that's why people tend to be reactive. But let's kick off the part about building the future ready association, Pamela, with what do you think is the major driver for not being proactive? We talked about that a little bit the last time you were here, but we need to start there to remind the audience of like, how can you flip that so that you're being proactive?
Yeah, I think there's a couple drivers I know we talked about in the last podcast around the cost of reactiveness. And I think, we're busy, right? I think people are busy just generally. And so it takes time and effort to be intentionally proactive, right? And so I think that's one of the drivers of why people don't do it. It's not kind of innate. And we're just busy moving on to the next thing. I think we have a problem, I think, just in general, all of us, with firefighting, putting out these fires on a constant basis, and that our focus is always around that instead of really being intentional, how we're more strategic and how we can be better prepared in our fields. So I think there's some of that kind of shift. It is literally a mindset shift that we have to make. And and then I think it comes down to leadership as well. I mean, I think there's, you know, leaders kind of set the agenda and work with others in the association and their boards to set and their members to set the strategy, to set the priorities, to lay out the decision making, to delegate that accountability. And so if the leader is not prioritizing proactive strategic thinking and kind of and ensuring that's embedded across an organization or association, then others aren't going to follow suit if it's not something where that stage is already set. So I think
Right.
there's just a lot of factors that come into play about kind of why we don't do that, right? Why we don't necessarily be proactive to start. That reactive, sometimes people I think that's just easier. But in the end, we've talked about how costly that is.
Well, and I think it's the human condition
Yeah.
that we're just going to stay where we are. It's like that old scientific rule about an object at rest remains at rest until it's acted upon by an external force. And
Right.
unfortunately, it seems like sometimes nonprofit organizations, especially associations, they tend to really need that external force. But let's say you have a client and they come to you and they're an association and they say, we're tired of swatting the gadflies. We're tired of just reacting every day. We want to change the way we do things. We want to have that mindset shift. What might be the first thing you suggest to them?
Well, the first thing I would have a conversation with them about is in looking at the association, I would want to know kind of how it's set up. What does their organizational design look like? What does their operational model look like? Because I think, being able to look at that with the leadership, with the president or the CEO, and kind of how do they use their board, right? How do they use their members? Understanding what the current design is, I think is one of the most telling ways to really understand what they prioritize and why they're firefighting so much, right?
Mhm.
So to me, it would be more like taking a step back and assessing what that entire organizational structure looks like before and then obviously understanding from leadership what fires they're fighting as well. But I think if you don't look at the design and how they're structured, then you're not going to have, I think, a clear picture of, why they are in the situation that they're in, why they're fighting the fires all the time, or why they feel like they're fighting the fires all the time. So that's the
Right.
first thing I would look at.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get caught up in your inbox with your email,
Correct.
especially if you are an association or an organization that does everything by email. It can be very time consuming just getting through there and then trying to organize them and make them, work well. It's really, I mean, thank goodness Gmail added an automation function now, which I am exploring and trying to use because I have a lot of email too, like a lot of people. But
Right.
one of the things, and I agree with you, you have to understand what the infrastructure is before you can see how they work together and communicate
Correct.
together and things like that.
Mhm.
And it does all come down to culture.
Yes.
So if we're not in a group of people who are willing to change and do things differently, like when you and I were preparing for this episode, I quipped, people always say, I don't have time to change. So, trying to find that space where they do have time to change or make the time to change. We all have the same amount of time.
Right.
It's what we decide to do at that time. And I think a lot of us don't like to admit that to ourselves. But you also had mentioned to me as we were prepping, we need to get from reacting to anticipating. So
Yes.
we may have that traditional association structure. And what I mean by that is like a staff and a board of directors and committees, and
Mhm.
maybe there's chapters or local networking groups. And that structure itself isn't bad, but it's how we're using that structure that we can, make some tweaks so that
Mhm.
it's less burdensome. But so how do you get to anticipation?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you're talking about. I think first, right, we talked about looking at the organizational design and having an understanding about how they process information, how they work together, how they respond to situations, right? But I
Mhm.
think it's creating a culture of preparation. We don't
Mhm.
necessarily do that for the most part across, nonprofits and associations. It's almost like changing your mindset around um, planning is as important as responding, right?
Mhm.
And so we, in the association world, I mean, we really should be spending, and I know, I've come from that world as well. We don't always spend as much time discussing opportunities as we do problems, you
Yes.
know and so we don't, so many meetings. I know that you can relate to this. So many meetings that we're
Mhm.
all in, we're discussing problems, we're discussing crises, we're discussing, how to put out fires, where, whatever it is, right? And sometimes the same problem keeps arising, and and then instead of fixing the system, we just fix the symptom, right? And so, I always find that when I look, and I know we'll talk about this a little probably more in detail later, but I always find successful associations that really prepare are intentional about setting time aside to be strategic and to be innovative. So
Mhm.
they literally don't make that a part of their operations meeting, or their status update meetings that we all go to, that could most of them could be in an email, right? They don't really put the time and energy that's required to do those separate kind of preparation. Some of them could be around organizational risk, right? And what's coming down the pike, and what do we need to plan for? That could be within the next 6 months to a year. That could be in the next 2 to 3 years, whatever it is. Some of it is that minimizing risk, but some of it is just frankly not taking the time to share emotional intelligence across your entire association. You know, intelligence that we get from members, from our board, from shareholders, and really from our industry and our profession, and really having conversations about how to leverage opportunities, how to take advantage of opportunities. And so that's what I think goes on. I just think we just don't really, because you have to be intentional, because you're always going to be busy. Like you said, your inbox is always going to be full. You're always going to have work. You're always going to have deadlines. You're always kind of going to have that cycle that continues. So unless you really take the time to, do that, it's going to fall to the wayside.
Well, and I love that you just used the word intentional and giving us all that great information, because you do have to intend to
Yeah.
be different. You have to set that intention and then move forward with it. And that's how we shift our mindset, by setting an intention and working toward it. But we do have to be intentional about everything. And listening to you just now got me thinking again about purposeful abandonment.
Mhm.
And that's how we can create the future ready association, because we have to let go of the things that don't work any longer. And it's hard for us to do that.
Mhm.
Recently, it's kind of a funny example. I was using a fitness app for over 10 years, and I was getting increasingly frustrated with it, but it had 10 years of my data in it. And I'm like, I got to try to make this work. Well, the company, the app from this particular company, and I don't want to say their name because, other people might like them, but the app just became unstable. And so more often than not, I was getting a blank screen. And I would
Mhm.
get very frustrated and then try to like keep making it work. I'd restart my phone, just wouldn't work. I'd go to
Mhm.
the website and log into my account, and they would send me a message. Why are you using the website? We don't even support it anymore. And I would write back, because your app doesn't work. So I
Mhm.
did that a couple of times. App still didn't work. So I just like about 2 weeks ago, just said, you know what? It's time to get a new app. I asked Google Gemini, how do I export all my data from this app so that I have it for future reference? oh, here's how you do it. So I exported my app. I got a new app that I only pay $5 a month for. And if you want to check it out, it's called My Net Diary. Works great, very easy to use. And their AI build-ins work as
Yeah,
opposed to this other app I used to use. They put in all this AI and it didn't work. It actually just made the app shut down. So
yeah,
this is a really good app. But it took me a long time to reach the conclusion because I had used it for so long. I
yeah.
like it. It's what I use. I'm used to it. But I finally had to say to myself, it is time to let this thing go. It is not working anymore. You need
Mhm.
a different one. So I did some research using Google Gemini and it gave me several options and I picked the one that I thought would be best for me.
Mhm.
So we do have to do that purposeful
Yeah,
abandonment.
yeah,
It sounds like a horrible thing, but it's really not. It's just really just letting go of what doesn't work and
right.
read any Brene Brown book if you like Brene Brown, or any book about,
Yeah,
spirituality, or you have to let go of what doesn't work. And
yeah,
it's also like letting go of programs at an organization. Like, oh, that webinar was great 10 years ago, but it's not relevant anymore. So we need to let
right.
it go. Let's give it a proper
Right.
burial and memorial and say, so long for now. We
Right.
will
And
bring
well,
it back.
and your example is so perfect about that app because we all do that. Whether it's in our professional lives, our personal lives, it's comfortable
Hmm.
for us, right? It's just comfortable. It's what we've always been using. I know how to use it. Has all my data here. It's a comfortable place. And
Hmm.
it's uncomfortable to purposely abandon, to use your words,
Hmm.
what doesn't work for us anymore. Sometimes that becomes incredibly uncomfortable. Sometimes, we feel, well, what if that doesn't work? And we start to question it. And also, it takes some work to do that, right? Because then you have to stop what you're doing. You have to do research on it. You have to find the app. You have to transfer the data. I mean, all of these things take work. It's not like you just snap your fingers and all of a sudden, you know you've kind of let go of it all and you move on, right? But then I'm sure, I don't want to speak for you, but I've been in those places too where then when you do it, you sometimes I look at myself and I go, what took me so long on this? why
Yeah.
why did I wait? So this is ridiculous. I'm messing with all this stuff over here, which is keeping me in the kind of reactive mode. And I just, just what took me so long.
Yeah.
I'm better. What I'm using now is better.
That's right.
Right.
And I do feel that way, Pamela. It's like, I've been frustrated with this app all year, 7
Yeah.
months, and it just nursing it along. And we invest time and effort into things. And
Yes.
so we really want to make sure after we do that, it's a good idea to let it go. We don't want to just say, hey, oh, just throw it out, whatever. You
Right.
want to make sure. And that's where I think organizations take a long time as well. It's like, well,
Yeah.
we've invested a lot of money in this program, or we've invested a lot of time and
Correct.
effort tweaking this AMS to get it to work for us. So should we really change? And you really do have to balance all that investment into a thing. But when it
Yeah.
gets to the point where you're losing on the investment, then you
Right. Right.
that's when the light comes on and you say, all right, it's time to move on, and it's not my job to fix your app if you're not going to pay attention to
Right.
it.
Right.
Right. So I need to move on
Right.
to an app that actually works. And if this app ever quits working, guess what? I'll move on again.
Right.
I just like recently, and I know we're using like funny little examples, but these are examples of how people are. Like I have a printer, a Wi-Fi printer.
Hmm.
It's 10 years old.
Hmm.
I didn't realize it was 10 years old. It still works. It works
Hmm.
pretty well.
Hmm.
But then it's an HP printer. They update the HP app. The HP app won't run it anymore
Right. Right. Right.
because it's 10 years old. And I'm just like,
Right.
okay. So I finally had to say, well, you know what? I really do need to be able to scan and stuff without using a
Right.
workaround. So I am just going to get a new printer. So I finally ordered a new printer a
Hmm.
couple weeks ago. So it's nothing wrong with using stuff that still works, but
Hmm.
if the thing, even if it's still kind of functioning, if it's not really integrating well,
Right.
then you do have to let go. You got to make that decision. And I think also what keeps us from being future ready, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is we build these messy, complicated tech stacks because we just add things on.
Hmm.
without really thinking about it and then removing something else. So do you think sometimes that a organization's commitment to its tech stack kind of gets in the way?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think it goes back to what you're saying, what you were saying earlier is, we keep doing the same thing and we keep building on it and building on it. And then sometimes we revise it and sometimes we do a little analysis on it and say, oh, well, it's not that bad, or we're getting some value for it. And we put all this time and energy into it and we put all this money into it. And sometimes you have to go in and you have to really be intentional about how you're looking at it.
Mhm,
And sometimes you have to throw it all out and start anew. Sometimes, and that's very scary for people,
mhm,
especially when you have spent the time and the energy, and the finances, and the man and woman power to kind of come in and do all this. It's I definitely think, we don't do enough. um I don't know if we put on the brakes enough with some of that stuff. I
mhm,
think, we tend to just keep going and going and going and going, and making changes here and there, but we don't necessarily really stop and think, what value is this creating?
mhm,
Right? Like, what value is this creating for our members? What value, and I'm talking macro here, but like, what value is this creating for our members? What value is this creating for yeah, our profession? What value is this creating for our employees? Whatever it is, right? Whatever you're looking at. I just don't think we do enough strategic thought
mhm.
around those type of things.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
just,
I agree because I think we end up with the messy tech stack. And I think
yeah.
that's a great example to use because we all have them.
Yep.
And we all think technology is going to fix everything.
Yep.
Sometimes it just gets in the freaking way, but
Yep.
that's
True.
but people react instead of thinking it through. Very on point with what you're trying to get us
Hmm.
to think about today. They react. So it's like somebody's complaining about sharing information at a meeting. Okay, well, we'll just add on this piece of tech. Here's another tool. Without
Right.
thinking about what tool do I already have that could fill that purpose, or is this
Right.
really so? Oh, just put that on there.
Correct.
No, and it's like the famous example, which I think I've shared with you before about many years ago. I said, I think maybe the IRS should require 1 hour board training every month. And
Right.
everybody pushed back and was like, no, we don't have time for that. Okay, but yet we always find time to fix the mess or the problem that gets created from people not quite knowing what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing it and why they're doing it. So, do you think that the concept of adaptive leadership is more important now more than ever, I think, because the world does change very quickly in the 21st century. So that concept of adaptive leadership, which is purposeful evolution in real time,
Mhm.
I think is a great way to change mindset. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, adaptive leadership is important. I mean, when I think of leadership, I mean, I don't, it's not about solving every problem, right? It's about building an organization that can solve problems well,
Mhm,
right? And so, you know, when you are in leadership, there has to be, and again, some of this has to be intentional too. Where you have to be flexible, you have to be adaptable, you have to be agile. I mean, there is so much in our worlds that moves so fast and evolves so quickly that if we don't have that kind of, adaptability, in almost all that we do, it doesn't mean you still can't have the structures in place that you need, or the design in place, or the type of model that you need to have in order to operate effectively and efficiently. It doesn't mean that you don't need to have all of that, but within that model, there has to be intentionality about, being adaptable, being strategic, being proactive. All of those things have to take place. Otherwise, again, it's just a mind shift, the way we think. Otherwise, if you're not doing that, you're never kind of staying ahead of the curve. You're constantly kind of behind, and you're constantly reacting to things instead of really being at the having foresight
Mhm.
before things occur. So I think it's one of the key things that needs to happen in leadership. And I think the more adaptable and flexible and proactive and strategic, all those words I use, but the more a leader, chooses to be intentional about how they use all of that,
Mhm.
it creates less chaos. And
Yes.
it shows how you can lead differently.
And you had mentioned to me before that leaders need to create capacity, not chaos. So
Yeah.
could you expand on that a little bit? Because I think if you could do that, that would actually give people like real actions that they can take. We've been talking a lot about, oh, you have to set an intention, you have to change your mindset. And those are big ideas, but we need the tactics to go along with that.
Yeah, I think there's really tangible uh areas where we can point to where associations are proactive and what we say ready, right? I think leaders, when you build capacity and not chaos, I guess what I meant by that is capacity, people think capacity is like created by maybe hiring more people. But
Mhm.
I don't believe it to be that way. I think it's created by leading differently. And so, it's things like empowering, hiring well and empowering others to make decisions, giving them agency to make these decisions, delegate, but also have accountability and standards, right, that are clearly defined. I think it's things like what we talked about before, being intentional about creating space for strategic thinking and innovation instead of constant firefighting and status updates, right? I think it's things like that. And that could be, having strategic. I mean, some people say, oh, well, we'll have a quarterly strategic meeting. No, you should have monthly strategic meetings. Sometimes with my function, we would have, several meetings around strategic thinking and decision making and leveraging opportunities a couple times a month. But I think at least associations should be doing that once a month with their leadership. Um, I think a leader's role, and we talked about this a little bit, is you need to be able to remove barriers, remove the red tape, and that exists anywhere in any job. But in the association world, we talked about all of these layers of stakeholders that you have, right? You have a lot of people internally that you work with and represent, and you have a lot of people externally that you do the same in terms of stakeholders. And so, leaders, what I have seen proactive leaders do is they really prioritize removing barriers for their leadership, their staff, their association as a whole. So, things like um stop doing work that doesn't create value, right? Being able to have meetings around, instead of a status update meeting, like I said, that could be an email, have a meeting around some of your big initiatives and have in-depth analysis and data to back it up around what has created value for your membership, for whatever, your employees, your industry, and have those conversations. And if it's deemed that it's really isn't creating value anymore, then the next step is to make a change, right? And
Mhm.
to not stop doing that anymore, right? I think one of the things I've seen proactive uh, leaders do in creating that kind of culture and association is they recognize employees who prevent issues, not just
Mhm.
those who put out crises and fires.
Mhm.
And that is huge because when you are recognizing a function or cross functional teams or leaders who are consistently preventing risks or, various issues that are going to kind of hit your association in a large way or your membership, um, you're saying that's a priority. right? You're saying being proactive is a priority, rather than, oh, let's talk about how, these three people put out this fire, right? And we tend to give people praise for that. And we tend to not, I very rarely see people get praise for what they've prevented. And
Mhm.
that trickles down, a leader does that, that trickles down across the entire association. So those are some, things I, think about when I see what proactive leadership does in really creating that culture of an intentional, being intentionally proactive in an association. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, it could go on, like, we say this all the time, but ask staff to instead of bringing a problem forward, bring a solution. And
Yes.
and it's not just one solution. I think sometimes when you are preparing, I would always say to my staff is bring a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D. You always have to have multiple kind of uh you have to look at multiple ways that you could be impacted, multiple outcomes, and then you have to create plans around those outcomes.
Yes.
So, or preventing those outcomes. So,
And I think that is a great list of actual things you can do. Tell people to bring a solution, bring options, look at things differently. I think the hardest thing is for a leader, especially if you're in the chief staff executive role, to stop, take a step back, and objectively look at what you're doing and how
yeah.
you're doing it, and then assessing the outcomes you're getting from that. Are you actually getting somewhere? There's a good question. If you're not, maybe you should stop doing that. It's
Right.
like that old joke, Doc, it hurts when I go like this, and the doctor says, then stop doing that.
Right. Right.
It's like,
Right.
how many, how many more times do we want to beat our head against the wall before we call it, right?
Right. And I think what you're saying, one of the ways I've seen association leadership be and nonprofit leadership be effective in that space is when, because you're right, a leader, a president, CEO, whatever, they're very busy, right?
Mhm.
And so you have to be really intentional about how you create that space. But I also have found the really proactive associations are the ones where leaders hire people that know how to do that under them, right? They have an executive team that they can then lean on that can help with that entire process. Because to expect a CEO to have every single initiative down, to have every single, kind of work plan down from a strategic plan, that's just not going to happen. And so, that leader needs to really lean on their executive team to be able to, and you have to have people in place that know how to do it and that prioritize it. But that can come from the leader too, saying this is a priority. But I think that doesn't always happen, you know?
Well, and I think, like you've mentioned several times, you have to have the right people in place. You have
Correct.
to have the right team that's willing to change, willing to try different things. I think a lot of times we run into well, Gladys, she's been here 35 years. And it's like, we're not, and Gladys just refuses to change, and nobody will ask Gladys to leave because she's been there 35 years. We have to stop rewarding longevity.
Yeah.
Like you said, we need to start rewarding problem solvers or problem preventers more than anything else, especially preventers. People say, hey, if we do this, we'll save X amount of hours or we'll save X amount of dollars. Or if we do this, we'll have space to do that. That's
Right.
really what we need to be looking at. And I'm going to just be frank here. I think too many associations are entrenched in copying other associations.
Mm.
There are practices that work well, and that's why we network. That's why we talk to
Hmm.
people because, hey, what are you doing? What AMS are you using? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or how are you handling board meeting agendas? Are you moving to a consent agenda? It's amazing how many people still don't use those.
Hmm.
Pretty simple thing. I use that with one of my clients. We have a consent agenda now and just makes our
Hmm.
board meeting more focused. So things like that, are you willing to do small changes too? It's like they always say, you can't turn a big ship around all at once. It's tiny movements. So are
Hmm.
you willing to make those tiny movements a little bit at a time? Because it was tiny movements that got you where you are now, where you're just putting out fires and reacting instead of being proactive. So we need to realize our association is our association, and
Mhm.
it can be whatever way we like, whether it's how we do stuff as staff or how we do things with the board of directors.
Mhm.
I am seeing a small change, a small movement forward where boards are scheduling strategic discussion at their board
Mhm.
meetings.
Mhm.
I think boards need to meet less as
Mhm.
well. And people
Mhm.
might say, what? And it's like, no, meet less, don't meet more, meet less. Because the board needs time to do their board work in between the meetings. So I
Yeah.
think meeting fewer times is better. Also, if you start to see a decline in board meeting attendance, that's another thing to look at. Maybe you
Mhm.
need to look at your board schedule. Change your board schedule. Don't just say this is the way we've always done it, and
Mhm.
quit burying your head in a glorious past that never actually existed. You run into that a lot at organizations like, oh, I remember 30 years ago and we used to do black tie dinner. And it's like, that was 30 years ago. And did you really do that? And how many people actually came? And people
Mhm.
don't do that anymore. People want to do a different kind of event. People
Mhm.
network differently now. So
Mhm.
being able to say the past is great. Oh, it's so interesting. Oh, we did used to have a gala dinner when people had time to go to a 7 day long conference every year.
Mhm.
Nobody does that anymore.
Mhm.
Somebody reminded me last year that the ASAE annual meeting used to be, let's see, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So it used to be a 4.5 day meeting, and now it's like 3 days. And I had totally forgotten about that because they just stopped doing it so long ago that I was like, wow, I totally forgot. I probably went to a couple of those early on in
Mhm.
my career, but you forget things and then you see what you're doing now is working. So acknowledge what you changed that is working and do more of that. And also, I want to hear before we wrap up, I want to hear your thoughts on risk tolerance because everything has some risk in it.
Mhm.
So if you try something new, what would be your advice for people who want to try something new, but they're afraid of the risk factor?
Yeah, I mean, I think risk it depends on what you're looking at in terms of the organizational risk. Like I would say that when you're looking at um, budgeting, risk should be a part of you should have a line item that covers risk and opportunity within there, because first of all you need to have some kind of flexibility with your budget to take on risks, to leverage opportunities. You just do. And that doesn't always happen. Usually you see budgets, it's very defined, and maybe there's a tiny little pot of money that everyone's vying for. And so I think it just needs to be part of your financial foundation. I mean, that's one of the things I would say. And then I think when you look at risk, I think you just have to do your due diligence in terms of research and weigh the pros and cons, right? I mean, I think it's one of those things. I think a lot of people don't want to do the due diligence because it takes time. And then what happens is they say, well, that just seems too risky, right? Um, so for me, I guess it just all depends because risk can mean a lot of things. So I
Mhm.
think it just all depends what kind of risk that you want to take. But I think behind that risk, there needs to be a foundation, a financial foundation to support it. And I think there needs to be due diligence anytime you're looking at taking a risk. However, I would say on the other hand of that, so that's kind of the foundational pieces that I would kind of want to see in place. But once you do all that, you know, I mean, they always say if you don't, take a risk, you're never going to see a reward. Or, the realities are you're never going to see innovation or you're never going to see value creation. You're never going to see what works and what doesn't. Sometimes you need to take a risk and maybe that failed. Okay, well, that taught us some really important lessons. And you know what? This opened up this other opportunity because we took this risk. So I think being risk adverse is a real problem for um, kind of the nonprofit sector. And I think you can, like I said, set up those foundational practices. So you're kind of doing your due diligence and really making sure that you've kind of looked at all the pros and cons and you've gotten yourself in a place. And then that kind of frees you up to say, all right, well, I've done this research. We could figure this out financially. So, you know, let's see if we can go for it. And so that's kind of how I see with risk. I mean, I always find that when you're risk adverse, that you're always going to be behind. If you literally operate as risk adverse, you will always be behind every other association. I mean, you have to be out there taking risks because if you don't take risks and you don't create value, I just don't think that you're relevant. You become a relevant association for your membership and your stakeholders.
Yeah. Uh, well said. And I think a good question to ask yourself is what's the worst thing that will happen
Right.
if it doesn't work?
Worst case scenario, frankly, right?
What's the worst thing that happen? We'll
Right.
lose $5,000.
Right.
We'll have to admit it didn't work. It's really what we need to do is just ask ourselves that. About a week or so ago, my husband and I were driving home from visiting someone, and we saw a sticker on a car that said, "But did you die?"
Yeah.
And we were trying to figure out what it meant. And we realized you might be complaining about something, but you're still alive to complain about it.
Right.
So it's like, did you
Right.
die? But did you
Right.
die? No, I did
Yeah.
not die. I'm still here.
Right.
So that's great. Well,
Yep.
Pamela, another great conversation. I know it's kind of hard to put yes, do the specific thing because everybody's working within a different environment at their own
Correct.
organization. But this has been great advice. And as you know, I like to ask my guests, what's the one thought you'd like the audience to take away today? And how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to talk more?
Sure. So in thinking about our conversations, we've had this whole part one of reactiveness and part two of proactiveness. I find that associations that thrive aren't the ones that react the fastest. They're the ones that prepare the best. That's really kind of my takeaway about being prepared and ready as an association. And then how you can find me, Minerva Insight Strategies. You can go to our website. It's minervaoutcomes.com. We are on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. We have a Substack called the Minerva Mindset. And you can find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Pamela. It's been great having you back, and I know you'll be back again.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed these conversations that I just believe are really relevant and important, right? As I know you do.
Yes, well, yes, I do. And unfortunately, we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. So, another reminder, please follow us or subscribe to our podcast, Radio Free 501c, on your favorite service. It'd be great. We're coming up on episode 350. Would love to have you involved in that as part of our audience. So, stay tuned for more info on that. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box by changing your mindset as a first step, check out our website, roguetulips.com, go to our services page, and then let's have a conversation. If you are interested in education, we are already open for registration for our fall education courses. So we have CAE prep course again and our CAE Redux again. So check that out. Sign up if you're getting ready for the exam. Those courses are open to everyone, no matter if it's your first time taking the test or maybe it's not the first time. So check that out. We also will be continuing to offer our ethics webinar throughout the rest of the year. So if you want to learn more about ethics or you want to get your continuing education credit for that, please check that out and sign up for one of our courses. It's updated every year. And again, this year we did update it. So check that out. If you want to find this episode featuring Pamela, you can go to our podcast page and then share it with all your friends and colleagues and catch up on our library of past episodes. So please do that as well. And if you want to know what's on my mind this week, which, as I always say, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, check out the blog and you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Rogue Speak. So thanks again. There's a lot of information we close the episode with every time, but check it out. and reach out with any questions or comments. And on behalf of Pamela and myself, we will see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together.